Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. Do you think we should have more women in our governments? Should more women hold positions in Congress, in the Senate, in local government? Do you want to be represented by a woman governor? Do you think it's important that we have more leaders who are in our governments that are women? And if you do, what do you think we should give them so that they can do more? Do you believe in quotas? Should we mandate equal representation, 50-50? Say that actually Congress should be 50% women and 50% men? The Senate, local government, government's offices? I mean, this is a step that many governments have taken. They actually have instituted quotas and said, we require gender parity or 50-50 representation in our legislatures. What do you think about this? Do you support it or not? Quotas can be controversial, but we know that globally, women are less likely to be in government. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the US. In 2023, in the 118th Congress, it had the highest concentration of women. 128 members of that Congress were women. It was more than ever before. And actually, the increase to that 128 was an increase of 60% from the previous Congress. So there was something really unique happening. More women were running and more women were winning. But even with a significant increase, right, an increase of 60%, which sounds incredible, and it is, of course, incredible, women still only accounted for 29% of the Congress. So women really aren't representing us in Congress, and they aren't really representing us in the Senate. If you look at the U.S. Senate, it's pretty stable. In the same election, they added one more woman into the ranks. Of course, what this means is that for most seats, over 70% in Congress and 75% in the Senate are held by men. So even though more women are running, they're nowhere close to parity. And this is also true if we look around the world. So if we look at, I'm going to talk to you about two countries, and you'll see why in a minute. But if we look at a country like Australia, you can see that women accounted for 38% of the elected officials in the 2022 federal election to the lower chambers. And that number is up from 30.5% in 2019. So you can see this increase in women in Australia as well. In Canada, the numbers are 30.7% in the Canadian House of Commons. So it's pretty consistent, right? Across these countries around the world, women's representation is better than it was in the past, but still relatively low. You still have over 65, almost 70% of the seats being held by men. And I asked you at the start of this podcast, what do you think about quotas? Like, is quota, Australia's been looking at this, but in a soft way. So the Labour Party has this kind of commitment to a 50-50 representation, but they're not coming close to the quotas. And I live in the state of Victoria, and they're really looking at how can you get 50-50 representation in a lot of areas through legislation. So quotas are a really powerful and a really interesting mechanism to force people to increase gender representation in governments. But they're also very politically difficult. They get backlash, right? There's an attitude about quotas as putting unqualified people in to increase representation. Now, I'm going to be clear with you. I think quotas actually are powerful and important. So I think quotas are good, honestly. And I think that attitude of we're just putting in less qualified women is actually offensive to women. It's a way to open up opportunity. Now, I know you're going to have a feedback on that, and I will take it. Send it to our Instagram. Tell me what you think. Of course, I'm here to hear the negative feedback about this or your thoughts. But I think it's an interesting and powerful mechanism. But since quotas can be really polarizing, one of the things we were interested in is, what about non-quota measures? How do we help women remain in politics or enter politics in meaningful ways in ways that aren't just about quotas. So if I ask you at the beginning, what do you think? Do you want more women in government? You might have said yes. And then if I said, should we have a quota that mandates 50-50 representation? You probably said no. So what's the middle ground? How do we find cohesion across this? So on today's podcast, we're going to unpack the misperception. Do people support giving women more resources to stay in government? What does that look like? I'm going to talk to you about an article that I wrote with Andrea Carson, Tim Gravel, and Leah Acosta Rueda that was in the Canadian Journal of Political Science 2024. This is called Understanding Public Support for Policies Aimed at Gender Parity in Politics, a Cross-National Experimental Design. And I want you to know, because you're going to fall in love with me even more, that this won one of the best paper awards at the American Political Science Association annual conference, presented by and led by the wonderful, incredible Andrea Carson. So this is an award-winning paper. I got the plaque to show, but people basically went mad for it. So let's see if you like it too. What we were interested in is whether the public was supportive of non-quota measures, and we had 4. Would the public be supportive of giving women and men in local and federal government a pay increase, a housework allowance, a childcare allowance, and make meetings available online to help keep them in? Was there support for these types of non-quota measures that maybe actually could help women reduce some of the role strain that they face when they're trying to be a local, a government representative, and help them to stay in the election? And what we were interested in is looking at, was there a difference in support for local government versus federal? And was there a difference in support if the politician was a man or a woman? The problem, of course, is that women don't necessarily vote for other women. And this is true based on research from all 3 of these countries, that actually you can't assume that women are going to be supportive of other women in politics. And there's a range of other factors that can structure that. But we wanted to test it regardless to see if women felt this sense of affinity to other women and thus supported them and gave them more resources. So here's what we did. We ran a vignette study. Now, what we do in vignette studies, and I'm going to share another one with you in another episode about cleanliness, but it's like you give people this story. Each person only gets one of these stories, so they don't see all the stories, but you give them a story and then you manipulate parts of the story. And you ask them, what do you think about this person? So I'm going to read you the vignette and then I want to see what you think. Now, keep in mind that what we manipulated was whether this politician was John or Jane. And then we manipulated whether they were, in Congress or on city council. And that's how we tested whether people were giving levels of support for this. So let me read the description. You can see how you would vote on this, or how your attitudes, how you would respond to this experimental design. Please read the following description of Jane below and tell us what you think. Jane, 33. Is a hardworking politician and mother of 3 children under 10. She has been representing her constituents in Congress and is deciding if she would run for the next election. She's well regarded by her political party and her constituents, but she also feels conflicted. She wants to be a good parent and a good partner. Privately, she has said, quote, being a politician and having young children and being expected to travel regularly is really challenging. And I think it is more challenging than I first imagined. What kind of supports, if any, should Jane receive so she can continue her political career in Congress? Do you agree that ... Then we ask them, should she get a childcare allowance? Should she get a housework allowance? Should she get a pay rise? Should they put the meetings online? Now, what we did is we took a sample, and this is what is so cool. So collected it from August 25th to October 12th, and we used SurveyMonkey. Like, have you ever taken a SurveyMonkey survey? And it could be for your employer or whatever. And then at the end, they say, do you want to answer a few more questions? Well, our survey came after. So you take in some sort of workplace survey and then it pushes you onto our survey. What happened was we got in Australia 8,413 people. In Canada, we got 9,000 people. In the US, we got 8,000 people. So this is, I just want to say, incredible because it's like usually we're doing surveys where we get like 2 or 3,000. We pay a lot of money for them. But this one is, there's so many people coming through SurveyMonkey. And God bless those of you who went on to our survey. But about 30,000 of them answered it. We found that actually people were really supportive of these non-quota measures, and in particular, if they were given to the woman, Jane, versus the man, John. People were supportive of giving Jane a pay raise, a housekeeping allowance, and a childcare subsidy. They thought that these were actually good resources that would help her stay in politics. We didn't really find this for online meetings. They were equally supportive of Jane and John, right? It didn't matter the gender. And that's just because people were pretty supportive of online meetings overall, right? It's like, sure, we're all in this post-Zoom world. It's low cost. Who cares? Give people online meetings. So they were more supportive of Jane getting this. We also found that if we described this hypothetical politician as someone who was in local government as opposed to, national office, like if they were in city council as opposed to Congress, they were supportive of the same things, right? They were supportive of giving them a pay raise. They were supportive of giving them a housekeeping allowance. They were supportive of the childcare subsidies, and they were supportive of online meetings. They're like, give these local people as much as you possibly can. They were supportive of on this. And we also found that women were more likely to be supportive of giving Jane these resources too. So when we asked, if it was Jane and you're a woman answering this, that they said the same thing, right? They were supportive of all of these factors. So we do find that women are more supportive of giving women more resources. Now, I bet you're wondering like, okay, hold on, but what about political affiliation, right? Like what's going to happen there? You're probably right about what you're thinking. Democrats were substantially more supportive than Republicans in the US on all of these policies. And the same pattern showed up in Canada. So those who were, identified as being conservative or the People's Party expressed less support than those who were in the Liberal Party. In Australia, political party didn't matter. So it kind of operated in the way you would expect, with the exception of Australia. People who are on the left are more supportive of giving more resources than those on the right. In Australia, political party was non-significant. And so what that probably means is this kind of idea of resources maybe is more culturally normative in Australia, and people are more supportive of giving everyone a fair go and giving them more resources. But we found those differences. So I know this is going to be short and sweet, but you have an election cycle to keep track of. And I just want to say, what do we find when we add it all up? What we find is that the public isn't really saying no to giving women more resources. They do see women as more deserving than men, and they do see that there's more support to give women these resources at the local level compared to the federal level. Women are more supportive of supporting women to stay in politics, but the effects are not particularly big, which means that men aren't really hostile to all of this. And so if we really think that having more women in our representation is important, there's scope to try this. There's scope to give more resources. If we do think that, we want women in government and we want women to stay in government and we want women to lead us, and people are not hostile to giving them more resources. Or they can understand that, sometimes it's difficult to balance out work and family, and that giving them childcare or giving them a housework allowance or giving them more money is useful. And what we find is it's about women at the local level. Starting out with your city councilor, right, is a critical starting point. This makes sense, right? They tend to be people in our community. We know that these jobs are intense and often not well paid, not well remunerated. And so there's an appetite for this to try. And if we think this is important, we should. So on today's Misperceived, we ask the question, is it actually a misperception? Do people support giving women more resources to stay in government? Hell yeah, they do. They are supportive of it, and we should try. And they're particularly supportive when it's their people, right? Like those in local government and women giving to other women. Now, we may not have quotas that come in, that might be politically divisive to mandate things, but there is support for these other softer, smaller, more kind of strategic interventions that we can put in place to help people do what they do best, to help them be politicians, but be present in their family, to help them give to the community, but also, manage their work lives. And so it's critical to think about innovation in this space and helping to ensure that, women don't get knocked out when they step in and they have an ability to build a long career in government, local government, Congress, Senate, governor's houses, without feeling like they have to make the incredible trade-offs that we often ask them to make, without us being so critical about them being bad mothers or, bad wives and questioning their abilities. I mean, if we're going to do that, then we might as well give them the resources to make it all happen. We expect them to be good parents. We expect them to be good representatives. Give them some support. Give them some childcare money. Give them some housework support. Give them a pay raise so that they can do it all. And in particular, give it to those in local government. As per always, thank you for listening to Misperceived, where you don't need a PhD. You just get to come hang out with me. And to all you women thinking about running for government, go for it. We need you. We love you. And we support you. Okay, bye. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.